Arise and go in, rest body and mind without anxiety, because the king's heart is turned. He will do you no harm, but rather keep his faith and promise to you and ensure your safety. He then told Edwin this. The king disclosed to the queen in secret his intentions, of which I told you before. Then she diverted him from the evil purpose of his heart, instructing and admonishing him that it in no wise became a king so noble and so excellent to sell for gold his best friend in the hour of his need, and to sacrifice honor, which is dearer than all treasures, for greed and love of money. Why should we say more? The king did as it has been said. He not only did not give up the exile to death, but also aided him in attaining to the throne. For soon after the envoys returned home, who sought his death, Redwold summoned his troops and gathered a large army to attack Ethelfrid. The latter marched to meet him with an inferior force, as the other did not give him time to assemble all his men. They encountered and fought on the borders of Mercia, east of the river called the Idle, and there King Ethelfrid was slain. In the year 616, King Radwold of East Anglia gathered his forces and marched on King Ethelfrid of Northumbria. He was met by his adversary's forces near River Idle, and there the battle took place, out of which Radwold came victorious, and so did Edwin. Following the battle, Edwin was given his birthright, the throne of Deira. What is more, he also took control of Bernicia, thereby having under his domain both kingdoms, just like the man who wanted him dead. For a prince who has been an exile almost all his life, and has just acquired the throne of his home country, this was an extraordinary feat, no doubt made possible by his supporter, Radwold. It wouldn't be absurd to imagine Edwin under the influence of Radwold during his early reign, considering the strength of Radwold and also the favors done by him to the new king. For 8 years following the Battle of River Idle, East Anglia under Radwold must have been the strongest kingdom in the island. This situation, however, would change following Radwold's death in the year 624, and power would shift northwards, as can be seen from several developments that happened soon after. In the year 625, Edwin married a princess from Kent. Albeit not being as strong as Ethelbert, his son, King Edwald, was still a prominent figure, and marrying into the Kentish royal family would still bring prestige to the groom. Prestige, however, wasn't the only thing that traveled north with the princess. There was also a bishop accompanying her, Paulinus. Our careful listeners might guess what would happen next. The role of Christian princesses in the spread of Christianity is a topic we've discussed briefly in our previous episodes, showing how Christianity was first brought to the Anglo-Saxons not by Augustine, but by Bertha, a Frankish princess. A similar progress will now once again happen at a very crucial time for the existence of the Anglo-Saxon Church. By this time, Christianity was faltering. Following the deaths of Ethelbert of Kent and his sub-king Herbert of Essex, both their successors reverted back to paganism. Radwold too was a failure of a convert, for as soon as he returned home after his baptism, he was persuaded by his wife and chief advisers to abandon Christianity. For a time, it seemed as if the works of Augustine, Ethelbert, and Bertha would all go to waste, as bishops of London and Rochester fled to Francia, and even the Archbishop of Canterbury contemplated deserting his post, a plan he had decided against after Saint Peter himself appeared to him in a vision and scourged him for ever contemplating such a thing. Edwald, son of Ethelbert, would convert back to Christianity after 6 or 7 years, but others wouldn't follow him, leaving him the only Christian Anglo-Saxon king, and not a fervent one either. So, in these times of dire need, the church was blessed with an opportunity. Prince Ethelbert arrived in Northumbria sometime around 624, and about a year later, Edwin agreed to being baptized. Even before his baptism, papal connections were established, as suggested by Pope Boniface's letter to Edwin, and a see was established in York, with Paulinus as its bishop. Finally, in 625, Edwin was baptized by Paulinus. Mass baptisms throughout his realm followed. It is partly thanks to these baptisms that we have more information about the spread of his power compared to his predecessors. During the peak of his power, Edwin had under his control kingdoms of Deira and Bernicia, the British kingdom of Elmet, Island of Man, Lindsey, and Mercians north of the River Trent. He also had significant authority over the East Angles, whose new king, Earlwold, was convinced to converting to Christianity by Edwin, showing that the alliance between Angles, which saw Edwin restored to his throne, was still in effect after Redwall's death, though this time the dominant power was the northern Angles. Moreover, Edwin was also allied to Kent, which made him even more powerful. So much so, his reach extended all the way to the Saxons of the Thames Valley. His attempt at asserting control over the region must have upset the local powers. An attempt on his life was made by assassins, believed to be sent by a West Saxon king of the name Cuichelm, after which Edwin marched on Wessex and laid to waste a large area as an act of retaliation. He was also working on creating a new archbishopric located in York, within the boundaries of his own kingdom. You see, the original plan of Gregory the Great has been to establish not one but two archbishoprics among the Anglo-Saxons. And now Edwin has been working towards achieving that, together with his ally Eadbald, and he was almost successful. Almost. Two pallias were dispatched from Rome in June of 624. However, the plan failed, since the power balance was once again changing. King Eadward of East Anglia, the guy who Edwin so baptized, was assassinated by a pagan circa 627, and with him Edwin's influence over the East Angles perished. The assassination was most likely a reaction from the East Anglian nobility to the new relationship between the two kingdoms established under Eadward's rule. Following his death, East Anglia remained pagan and out of the influence of Edwin. East Anglians reverting back to the old gods and kings after Eadward not being baptized shows that Edwin was no longer as influential, if any, over the country as he once had been. As if that wasn't enough, trouble was brewing in the south. A coalition was forming to counter the rapid rise of Northumbria. It was led by the British king of Givenet, Cadwallon ap Cadfan. He was joined by Penda of Mercia. There might have been, and there probably were, more people in this coalition, but these two are the most important, and these two are the ones that we are sure were involved. So anyways, following Edwin's ascension to power, sons of Ethelfrid, the king who was killed, had taken refuge among Scots and Picts, and their sudden return after Edwin's defeat suggests that they too might have been present at the battlefield with Scottish and Pictish troops under their command. Anyhow, Edwin was defeated and slain in the Battle of Hatfield Chase in the year 633. What followed afterwards was the disintegration of the old kingships of Ethelfrid and Edwin. Northumbria was once again divided into two. Eanfrid, a son of former Northumbrian king Ethelfrid, seized power in Bernicia, while Edwin's cousin, Osric, took control of Deira. It is probable that Eanfrid was part of the coalition and became king over Bernicia with Cadwallon's permission, and was expected to act as a puppet. Osric's situation is less clear. We don't know if he was installed to the throne by Cadwallon or if he simply succeeded his predecessor, as was his royal right, consolidating the remainder of their forces to resist Cadwallon. What we know is that although Edwin was killed and Northumbria was contained, Cadwallon didn't leave, and in the next summer he attacked and defeated Osric in battle. Yet he didn't even stop there and kept ravaging the Northumbrian lands. Eanfrid then met the British king, hoping to make peace. Unfortunately for him, what he found in the meeting was not peace, but death at the hands of Cadwallon. After defeating Osric and murdering Eanfrid, Cadwallon was able to roam freely in Northumbria for a whole year. This situation, however, wasn't a conquest, but rather an attempted annihilation of the Northumbrian people as a whole. Or that's what Bede says, and I quote, "After that, for a whole year he held the province of Northumbria, not as a victorious king, but as a tyrant, furiously ruining and rending it as it were with tragic carnage." The murder of Anfrid was a turning point for the war. The sons of Ethelfrid seems to have been in alliance with Cadwallon until that moment. However, the regicide now made one thing very clear. Cadwallon's hostility wasn't directed solely towards Edwin and his successors, but rather to all Northumbrian nobles, whether they be Bernician or Deiran. If Northumbria was to exist, someone had to stop Cadwallon. That someone would be Oswald, a brother of Eanfrid. Following his brother's death, Oswald became king in Bernicia, and Cadwallon marched north to confront him. Oswald was heavily outnumbered, so he took a defensive position near the Hadrian's Wall, and the two armies met there. The Welsh, having the superiority of numbers, launched their attack, but their numerical advantage proved useless, as it were the Bernicians who held the battleground in the end. The Welsh were put to flight and cut down. The tyrant Cadwallon was too caught and slain amongst many others, finally bringing an end to the Welsh occupation of Northumbria. So basically, that was the end of Cadwallon and the start of the rise of Oswald. Now, there are some details about this battle, more than we usually have for the battles of this era, and although those are more legend than history, we will still mention the legend because every legend contains some truth in it, and apart from that, it is both entertaining and also useful to get a general feeling of just how the people of that era felt about the battle. So it is said that the night before the battle, Saint Columba appeared to Oswald in a vision, promising him victory. Following his vision, Oswald raised a cross on the land and prayed for victory, encouraging his army to pray with him. His prayers were heard, since the day brought him the much-needed victory. Bede claims that Oswald's force was so much smaller in size compared to that of his enemy that the victory was nothing less than a miracle. Indeed, the battle site would come to be known as Heavenfield and would become a spot for pilgrimage. Now, it would be foolish to disregard this story as wholly fiction. Oswald may very well have seen a vision or claim to have seen one to encourage his followers before a battle that seemed impossible to win. We know that Oswald was converted during his exile and he was a fervent believer of Christian God. However, the real cause of his victory was probably his good defensive position, strategy, and perhaps a Scottish force assisting him rather than prayers. We should also take into consideration that at this point, Cadwallon's army had been campaigning deep into enemy territory for more than a year. His chieftains and soldiers must have been exhausted and perhaps demoralized, wondering the point of still waging war after having achieved their initial objectives. Through either a miracle or a feat of tactical genius, or perhaps both, Oswald defeated Cadwallon and proceeded to unite the realms of Deira and Bernicia once again, ruling both as the new king of Northumbria. King Oswald is an important figure in Northumbrian history, as his reign saw many changes to the kingdom. Therefore, we shall talk about his upbringing and early years before telling the story of his reign. Oswald was the produce of Ethelfrid's marriage to a Deiran princess. He was born sometime around 604, soon after Ethelfrid took the throne of Deira. He was only 12 years old when his father was defeated and killed by Redbolt. Following that, he was forced to go to exile with his family to the Scottish kingdom of Dalrieta, where he spent his youth years. There, he converted to Christianity and became well acquainted with the Scottish language and culture. The effects of this exile on the young Bernician prince shaped the future of Northumbria. We have mentioned earlier in this episode how Christianity was losing ground among Anglo-Saxons, and the effect of Edwin's conversion. Following his defeat, the situation was once again alarming for Christianity. Bede talks about the situation, criticizing Osric and Amfrid, both once Christians, for reverting back to their old ways after taking control over their respective kingdoms. Oswald, however, proved to be a more sincere convert. Following his ascension to the throne, he set on to evangelize his subjects. For this mission, he requested a bishop to be sent from the Abbey of Iona. His preference of Iona over Canterbury is a clear effect of his exile. Oswald, when he was young, was taught in the ways of Gallic Christianity, rather than the Roman Catholic one. We're going to talk more about the differences between and the effects of this choice in our next bonus episode, but for now let's stick to the story. His request was approved and a bishop was sent, but he proved to be useless. Again, more on that story in our bonus episode. And after which, Bishop Aidan, later Saint Aidan, was sent to Northumbria to preach. And as you can understand from his saintness, in preaching he was successful. He was very successful. He converted many people and firmly established Christianity among Northumbrians. This was encouraged by the king, so much so that at times he acted as a translator for Aidan to help him preach. Oswald is portrayed as a saintly king by Bede. He tells the story of how Oswald gave his food to the poor who crowded outside his hall, begging for alms, and how Aidan blessed him, holding his right hand and praying it would never perish, which, according to Bede, was a wish granted by God. What he fails to mention, however, are the wars and destruction carried out by Oswald, for however saintly he might have been, Oswald was a king of Northumbria and he had a power base to re-establish. And in that, he was successful. Again, we don't know how much of a dominance he had south of Humber, but we can deduce from the scraps of information we are given that he was influential in Wessex, East Anglia, and to some extent even Kent. He stood sponsor to the baptism of West Saxon King Cenelgis and married his daughter. He might have also had some influence in the northern parts of Mercia. Furthermore, he annexed the minor kingdom of Lindsey into Northumbria. North of Humber, Oswald campaigned against the Britons and absorbed the kingdom of Gododin into Northumbria after sieging and conquering their capital, Edinburgh, in the year 638, 5 years after his ascension to the throne. Unluckily for him, he had a mighty adversary in the south, King Penda of Mercia. We've mentioned his name a couple of times in this episode, but we haven't talked of him in detail until now, since we were focused more on the Northumbrian side. Now is an appropriate time to talk a little bit about Penda and Mercia. We don't know much about Penda's early years, as is the case with all Anglo-Saxon leaders of the era, save for a few. We don't even know when he actually started reigning as a king. According to the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, Penda began his reign in the year 626, and he fought the West Saxons and conquered Cirencester 2 years after that. However, Bede mentions a king of the Mercians named Cearl ruling around those years, which might mean Penda was a warlord rather than king at the time. It is also possible that Mercians might have had more than one king at the time, and Penda was a dynastic rival of Cearl. We just don't know. What is clear is that by the year 633, after the Battle of Hatfield Chase, Penda was the king of Mercia. And sometime after that battle, Penda attacked East Anglia and slayed their king, Egric, after which Anna became king there, who was hostile to Penda for all his reign, perhaps due to a helping hand offered by Oswald during his ascension to the throne. Penda is described by Bede as the most valiant soldier of the Mercian royal race. He was without a doubt a warlike king, and also a pagan. He must have presented a great threat for his neighbours, seeing how Cynegils of Wessex accepted baptism and married Oswald's daughter, quite possibly seeking protection of Northumbria against his Mercian neighbours. Just how dominant he was, however, is again open to discussion. A brother of Penda named Eowa is mentioned as king of the Mercians in several sources. Eowa might have simply been a sub-king of Penda, ruling the northern parts of Mercia under Penda, while Penda ruled in the south. However, one sentence written by Bede makes us question if Eowa was simply a sub-king, or perhaps more. Bede says that Penda ruled over Mercia with varying fortune, which might suggest that at some point he might have been weakened, therefore forced to share his royal power. However strong he may have been during the early years of his reign, by 642 he was strong enough to defeat King Oswald in the Battle of Mayerfield. We don't know what was it that led to war between the two kings, but we need not wonder too much, for both sides were contending for authority over whole Britain, and that was reason enough. Penda once again had the British with him, the only difference being that this time he was the war leader. Eowa is also mentioned in the casualties, though which side he fought on is not known. What is clear is that Northumbria was defeated, and with Oswald cut to pieces, Penda was now the most formidable of Anglo-Saxon kings. Meanwhile, to the south, events were happening, which led to a new war. Cynegild of Wessex died in the same year of the Battle of Mayerfield, and was succeeded by his son, Cenwalh. The new king of Wessex abandoned Christianity, perhaps seeing how the tide was changing, and he reverted back to the old gods, and 3 years into his reign set aside his wife to marry another woman. His wife, however, was no ordinary woman to be offended, as she was the sister of Penda, who didn't take kindly to this insult. Penda marched on Wessex and drove Cenwalh out of his kingdom, probably installing a puppet king in his place. Having been driven out of his kingdom, Cenwalh sought refuge in the court of Anna, king of East Anglia. Cenwalh spent 3 years in exile, during which he was baptized, and he finally recovered his throne in the year 648 with East Anglian assistance. Sheltering of Penda's enemies by Anna must have damaged the already hostile relations between Mercia and East Anglia beyond repair, for 3 years after, Penda marched on East Anglia and defeated Anna, driving him into exile to the sub-kingdom of Magonsate. After this war, Penda annexed the land of Middle Angles and made his son Peada their king in the year 653. Around the same time, Anna returned to his kingdom. Soon after, Penda once again marched on East Anglia, this time slaying Anna and his son in battle and installing Anna's brother Ethelhere as a client king. But what of Northumbria? Well, after their king's death, Northumbria was once again divided into two. Oswald's brother, Oswiu, became king in Bernicia, while in Deira, a man named Oswin, a son of Osric, succeeded to the throne. And so they ruled in their respective kingdoms for 7 years, until a conflict broke out. According to Bede, it was Oswiu who was to be blamed for it. Bede tells how good a king Oswin was, humble, good-looking, and beloved by all. He was also a good Christian. There's a famous story that goes as such. King Oswin once gifted a handsome horse to Bishop Aidan, who, after receiving the gift, gave it away to a poor man, for Aidan preferred walking over riding. Oswin chided him for giving it away, saying that if the poor needed a horse, they could have given a less handsome one. Why that horse? To which Aidan replied, asking if the king valued the offspring of a mare more than a child of God. Upon which the king saw his mistake and asked for forgiveness and the friendship of the bishop, both of which were given to him. Bede likes the man and he praises him and puts him in a good light, but there was a guy who didn't like him, or rather, who would be much better, much stronger with Oswin out of the way, and that guy was, as you can guess, Oswiu. So Oswiu finally, after 7 years of disunification, assembled his forces, and Oswin, seeing how he could not content his rival, disbanded his host, and taking only one warrior with him, sought refuge in the estate of his most loyal alderman, perhaps to fight another day, or perhaps he planned to retire completely. Unfortunately for him, this proved to be a bad choice. He was betrayed by the men he trusted and murdered treacherously. 12 days after his murder, Bishop Aidan also died. Oswin was a dangerous threat to Oswiu's ambitions, a daring king who had managed to establish good relations with Aidan's Lindisfarne and with his subjects. But his murder didn't really work for Oswiu. Although he was killed and thus moved out of the way, the era didn't pass under Oswiu's control, and Northumbria thus remained divided, now with Ottilwald, Oswiu's nephew and son of Oswald, ruling over Deira. Whether he was installed to the throne with his uncle's support or in opposition to him is not exactly clear, but he would later be hostile to his uncle and side with Penda. This wasn't the only incident of Oswin's reign. At an unknown date, though clearly before Bishop Aidan's death, Bernicia was invaded by Penda. The Mercians managed to penetrate deep into Bernicia, going as far as Bamber and besieging the royal stronghold of Oswiu. But Oswiu wisely avoided open battle and Bamber held, which forced Penda to return home with what he had pillaged so far. Other similar attacks might have happened during the 640s, but the relations between Oswiu and Penda weren't always hostile. By the early 650s, relations began to normalize, perhaps due to Oswiu being stronger now. About the year 653, Oswiu's son, Alfred, married Penda's daughter, after which Penda's son, Peada, requested Oswiu's daughter in marriage. Oswiu demanded that Peada be baptized and allow missionaries into his kingdom, and it was accepted. So, as was the case many times before, again, a Christian princess brought with her priests into a pagan kingdom. Now, when I'm saying his kingdom, I'm not talking about the whole Mercia, I'm talking about Peada's kingdom, which we don't know where he exactly ruled, but it was probably northern parts of Mercia or the Middle Anglians Peada was ruling, of course under his father's authority as a representative of his father. Anyways, and though a bishop would be appointed later, only after Penda's death, the pagan king didn't object to coming of missionaries. So he didn't go as far as allowing a bishop into his country, but he didn't say anything. He didn't object his son's business. Oswiu kept using religion to further his influence deeper into southern England by convincing the King of Essex to get baptized, which saw the return of the Bishopric of London that has been vacant ever since Marinus left for Gaul following the death of King Sabert of Essex in the year 616. So what's happening here is that Oswiu took advantage of this normalization of relations and he seduced Penda's son, and Penda didn't really object. So then he started using this connection and tried to extend his influence further down south. And this obviously would annoy Penda. Penda was no fool, so sooner or later, although at first he tolerated this, he must have seen what was going on in his country and in his area of influence. So at last Penda's patience ran out, and in the year 655 he assembled an army and marched north to confront Oswiu. This army Penda had assembled was a huge one. Penda had a mighty host consisting of 30 warlords, Britons under King Cadafael of Givenet, East Anglians under Ethelhere, and Ethelwald's Dairens. It was a mighty army, and the sight of it must have been terrifying. And indeed it was terrifying, for King Oswiu was himself terrified, and not wanting to face the army in open battle, he retreated to a place called Ideo. He was besieged there, and he tried to buy peace by offering tribute. Bede claims that this offer was refused by Penda. However, the events that follow tell us otherwise. Following this offer, Penda and his army began moving back south to their homeland, and on the way they were ambushed by Oswiu's forces near the river Vinward in the area of modern-day Leeds. The sudden attack was disastrous for Penda's army. Worse yet, he was abandoned by his allies. Cadafael escaped with his army during the previous night, while Ethelwald of Bernicia withdrew, preferring not to interfere. This abandonment of Penda by his allies tells us what Bede doesn't, perhaps as to not show a Christian king lying and exploiting his way into victory against a pagan. Luckily, we can disregard propaganda and try and create a narrative, create a story of this war from what we know. Penda had this big army with him and he marched his army and Oswiu retreated to a stronghold. He then bought peace, convincing Penda to return home with tribute and probably concessions, political concessions, and perhaps religious ones as well. Penda must have clearly had the upper hand, having 30 times as large a host than that of Oswiu's, according to Bede. Him being convinced to return home despite his huge advantage shows that he must have been given a really good deal by Oswiu, perhaps a deal Oswiu could not possibly put into effect, or perhaps didn't want to. For his allies, however, it was clearly not the case. Ethelred of Bernicia was probably hoping that Oswiu would be slain in battle, so that he could take the throne of Bernicia, which belonged to his father. Cadafael, meanwhile, would be hoping to weaken Northumbria, which would lessen the pressure put on his British allies up north. So, when Penda decided to take what was offered, hoping to avoid a long siege, and began his march south, his allies were discontent. Cadafael deserted him first, leaving during the night. Then, when Penda's army was ambushed by Oswiu, his other ally, Ethelwald too abandoned him, perhaps still angry about the outcome of the campaign. Not all abandoned Penda, however. Ethelfier's East Anglians stayed and fought to death with their comrades. It was a horrible battle where more men died by drowning than by sword, and after the battle, Oswiu emerged as supreme power in Britain. And that is all for today's episode. In our next episode, we will witness the downfall of Northumbria and the golden age of Mercia. Also, keep an eye out for our new bonus episode, which should be coming in this week, in which we're going to talk more about Bishop Aidan, the differences between Gaelic and Roman Catholic Christianity, and Christianity for normal, common people like me and you. Before ending the recording, I want to thank my girlfriend for beautiful drawings that we've been using since the second episode. It's a hard work, considering many of the characters from the era, like Penda, who's a really important guy, don't have any portraits of them, and she has been doing an excellent job so far. I really appreciate the portraits, as I think they are beautiful and they also help viewers visualize the situation better, and hopefully we'll keep those coming. Thank you for listening and stay tuned. Until next time.